The hatred that fueled 19 individuals to blow themselves up and take 3,000 innocent people with them has its genesis in the history of U.S. foreign policy and the U.S. exploitation of people in oil-rich nations around the world. Yet, conspicuously absent from the national discourse and conspicuously absent from the 9/11 Commission report is any real analysis of why we were attacked on 9/11. It wasn't that they don't like our democracy, or they would not have hit the Statue of Liberty instead of the Pentagon and the World Trade Center. Pentagon, center of U.S. military power. World Trade Center, center of U.S. economic power. So after 9/11, very soon after 9/11, I decided to do a little research and figure out exactly what made Osama bin Laden so mad. And by the way, I am no fan of Osama bin Laden's, but I thought maybe it would give us a clue as to why we were attacked. 3 things that Osama bin Laden was upset about. First of all was the presence of U.S. troops in the holy lands of Mecca and Medina in Saudi Arabia. And by the way, there are U.S. troops all over these oil-rich lands, Arabic lands, Persian lands. Secondly, were the punishing sanctions, and this was during the Clinton administration, punishing sanctions which killed 1 million Iraqis. And the third was Israel's treatment and occupation of Palestinian lands, treatment of the Palestinians. Nobody talked about that. How many people heard that in the mainstream discourse? Nobody talked about that. So now we have what is called a global war on terror. And we all talk about the war on terror as if it's a real war, as if terror is a real enemy instead of a tactic. Who declares war on a tactic? The war against terrorism, which justifies any number of horrific things, including the decimation of our own civil liberties in this country. And by the way, it's slated to go on forever, this war on terrorism. There are already 60,000 foreign troops, including 36,000 Americans in Afghanistan. And large increases in U.S. troops during the past year have failed to stabilize the situation there. Most American forces operate in the eastern part of the country, yet by July of this year, attacks there were up 40%. Brzezinski, who was the national security advisor for Jimmy Carter and made plenty of mischief himself, is skeptical that the answer for Afghanistan is more troops. And of course, John McCain and Barack Obama. Barack Obama was one of the first people to call for more troops in Afghanistan. And after he is elected, we are going to have to push him on this and hold his feet to the fire. I think that we can work with him, and I don't think we can work with John McCain, and we'll hope for the best. But Brzezinski warns that the United States, like the Soviet Union before us in Afghanistan, are seen as the invader and resisted, especially as we conduct military operations, he says, with little regard for civilian casualties, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Brzezinski advocates Europeans bribing Afghan farmers not to cultivate poppies for heroin, as well as the bribery of tribal warlords to isolate al-Qaeda from the Taliban. And he says that Taliban is not a united force, not a world-oriented terrorist movement, but a real Afghan phenomenon. Yet our government frequently conflates the Taliban with al-Qaeda. In July of this year, the RAND Corporation released a report that said current U.S. strategy against the terrorist group al-Qaeda has not been successful in significantly undermining the group's capabilities. The United States should pursue a counterterrorism strategy against al-Qaeda that emphasizes policing and intelligence gathering, this is according to the RAND Corporation, rather than a war on terrorism approach that relies heavily on military force. This is the RAND Corporation. Afghanistan, according to a national intelligence estimate, which is the consensus of the 16 intelligence agencies in the country. It's a classified report, and it's evidently so horrific that they don't want to make it public. But according to people who have leaked some of the contents of this report, Afghanistan is in a downward spiral. There's a breakdown in central authority that's been accelerated by rampant corruption in the government of Karzai. Of course, he's our man on the job there, and an increase in violence by militants. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Mike Mullen, said that the trends across the board are not going in the right direction, and this downward spiral is likely to continue. In 2007, more than 6,500 people died in the Afghan conflict, and a July 2008 NATO report estimates that 900 civilians have been killed thus far this year. On August 22nd, a U.S. missile attack in western Afghanistan reportedly killed 90 men, women, and children. The U.S. is disputing those figures. The UN and NATO says it was 90. The U.S. said it was only 33. According to the UN, 1,445 civilians were killed from January through August of this year, a rise of 39% over 2007. David Petraeus, you all know who he is. He's the hero of du jour. He is, and he's just been made CENTCOM commander. He says, said in a recent New York Times interview, obviously the trends in Afghanistan have been in the wrong direction, and I think everyone is rightly concerned about them. Certainly in Afghanistan, wresting control of certain areas from the Taliban will be very difficult. In both Afghanistan and Pakistan, in certain areas, the going may be tougher before it gets easier. The British ambassador to Afghanistan reportedly told the French ambassador to Kabul last month, the foreign forces are ensuring the survival of a regime which would collapse without them. They are slowing down and complicating an eventual exit from the crisis, which will probably be dramatic. In the short term, we should dissuade the American presidential candidates from getting more bogged down in Afghanistan. Good advice there. There has been, although there is some talk in the presidential debate, should we have a surge in Afghanistan, should we have a surge? There has been a surge. There's already been a surge in Afghanistan. Somewhere around early 2007, the number of troops over the next 18 months was raised by 20,000, a 45% jump. The violence also jumped, by the way, 50%, parallel to this surge. The number of civilians killed skyrocketed. In the 15 months of this surge, more civilians were killed than in the previous 4 years combined. And during the same period, there are no jobs, there's very little reconstruction, and even less security. Sounds a lot like Iraq. The rising civilian death toll and the decaying economy provide a profitable recipe for the Taliban, which is gaining support increasingly among the people, recruiting significant numbers of new fighters. They see them as the lesser of two evils. Afghanistan is one of the poorest countries in the world. The official unemployment rate was 40% the last time it was calculated in 2005. Many people say it's up to 80% now. And about 45% of the population is now unable to purchase enough food to guarantee bare minimum health levels. Washington spends about $100 million a day on this war. You wonder why we have this huge deficit. You wonder one of the reasons why the economy is so bad, besides the tax cuts for the corporations, and that is these expensive wars in Iraq, in Afghanistan. And there is a connection, and I think we have to constantly make that connection when we're talking to people.